Hi everyone. So for this video, I'm going to talk you through the GitHub for this project in more detail with a view to familiarizing you with the way that I've laid out the code and some of the choices that I've made, which hopefully now that you've gone through the Python material will feel a bit more familiar. And then I'll highlight the areas that I'm thinking about for collaboration and demonstrate how this repository looks and how to work on it in Replit. So for this video, I'm just going to talk through the files in the repo and kind of give you an overview of what's going on. You can see here, so that I'm on the GitHub for the Python repo here, and again, I'll have a link to that in the summary materials, but it will also be in the materials from the intro module. So what you can see here is there's a few different bits going on in this repo, and some of it I won't go into in that much detail. That's kind of technical stuff around how we're packaging the software, but it's maybe worth having a bit of an awareness so that in future, if you're looking at other Python libraries, you kind of know what to look for and what to expect. So here at the top level, you can see that we've got these kind of files like the license, which is the license for releasing this code. So any open source software needs to have some kind of license. For this, I've used a default MIT license, which grants full permission for anyone to use the software for any reason, both commercial or non-commercial. However, different places will have different licensing. I know for a lot of government projects, they're released under the Open Government License, which is slightly more restrictive. It's kind of a whole topic that's not really worth getting into, but you'll often see a license like this at the top level of any open source repo. Otherwise, I have a git ignore file, which is information about what I don't want to be uploaded to GitHub. And if you have a look at this, it's quite long, but it kind of describes a bunch of different files and file types that I don't want GitHub to upload to. Then you have this .replit file, which is specific information about Replit that they've added, and they'll read from this repo. Again, you don't really need to worry about this because it's ran automatically. Then there's the license that I mentioned. There's the README, which is what's displayed here. And then this which is part of the management of the packages that I use within this project. So for example, this locks the version of pandas I'm using, the version of NumPy I'm using, and any other libraries that are being used here. And then finally, the pyproject.toml is a kind of config file where I actually describe what this package is about. So you can see here I've got the version, the name, I've got the author, which is currently just me, but I think we'll try and add everyone to the authors list at some point over the course of this project, and some other information about this. Again, most of this is stuff that I'll be managing, so it's not worth worrying too much about now. But I think it's interesting to have a sense of what's going on, and there may be some of you out there who are interested in getting more involved on the maintaining side. And I think at that point we'll definitely talk more about this. Otherwise, the other areas, so there's a workflows directory here that again you don't need to worry about too much. All this does is set up kind of some automated tests to run. So when you guys are working on the rules, some of the checks that are made to make sure you put the rules in the right format happen automatically when you submit the code to GitHub, and this kind of describes what tests to run and why. Otherwise, the brunt of our code is going to live in this Validator 903 folder, and then the tests for the code live in the test folder. So what I'll do is, rather than talking through this more here, there's a run on Replit button, which I've added to this repo. And if you click this, what it will do is it will take a copy of this repo and put it in Replit so that you can edit it locally and make some changes. And with a few minor changes that I'll discuss in the next video, that's how we'll do editing going forward. But for now, I'm just going to talk through the file structure on there. So if I click this, what you should hopefully see is that this loads up fairly quickly into your Replit. And you can see here it's cloned from GitHub. It's pulled down all the information, and it's now just loading in here. And now once you're here, you can see that same file structure has been uploaded here. It's correctly picked up that some of these are package management files, and right now it's displaying the README and showing a preview of the README here. And if you click on version control, you can see that it's linked back to that GitHub repo, and it's describing some information about the version. And again, we will get into that in the next video. For now, I think we'll just talk through the code a bit more. So if I sort of focus on the sort of code space here, so you can see that we've got tests here, where I've written some tests I've written for some of these modules, and I'll probably add a few more of these later on. And then we've got the actual code. The way this is laid out, and you can see this in the README here, is we've got the API Python, which is for the interface with the web and JavaScript, the config file, which is for high-level configuration, the ingress, which kind of handles the CSV and XML files and the conversion from that into a common data format. Then a types file, which just shows various kind of types and objects that we might want to use across the work. And then most importantly is this validators file, and that's where you guys are going to be working the most. So I won't spend too much time going through this, but I would encourage you guys in your spare time, if you're interested, to try and understand how this all links together. Broadly speaking, in the config, you can see that I've configured some column names for each of the 903 files that we currently support, and really here this is just about including some external information that we might go on to need later on. So what this says is if it has these columns, it's probably this kind of header file. And here I'm just trying to provide that information to make sure that we're able to match that in the ingress stage. Otherwise, the important part for our work is this list of configured errors. So you can see that right now I've only got these two fake errors, which I'm using and importing from the validators file. However, I'll be removing those shortly from this repo, and over time, the hope is that this configured errors list will then list every error that it's possible for this validator to check. And you can see that these errors are currently being imported from validators. But the import star syntax just means import every single function that's in validators. So if we have a look at the validator side now, you can see the structure of the errors that we're looking at here. So let's take this fake error. So this fake error is an error that fires if the child was born prior to 2006. And you can see there's kind of two parts to this function. So the first part here is that I've imported this error definition type, which is a type that I've created specifically for describing an error. And an error definition has three values: a code, which should be a string. Usually this is going to be a number, but I've chosen to make it a string because occasionally the code given by the DOB is like, 25 brackets and amended or something like this. A description, such as for here, it's this is a fake error that fires if the child was born prior to 2006. And then slightly less clearly, a list of affected fields. So the way this works at a high level is if a row of the data fails this validation check, it will highlight all the fields that are listed in this affected fields attribute. So what this says is that if the child was born prior to 2006, it should highlight the DOB field in that table. So this is kind of more about the formatting or what you want to be highlighted in the tool. So that's the definition for the error, but how about actually checking for the error? So I'll talk more about this in a later video, but you can see that this function returns two things. So it returns this error and then this validate function, which I've created internally here. And this is a perfectly allowed thing in Python. Functions are also just variables, so you can define them within a function and return them as a function. And the broad idea here is that you're returning information about the error together with a function which, if called, will be able to tell you where that error is present. And if we sort of break down this simple error here, you can see what I've done is, so this object, again, I'll talk more in detail about the structure of this in another video, but what this is broadly is a dictionary where the keys are the names of the tables and the values are the actual data for that table, so the data frames. So for this one, it applies to the header, because the header is where the date of birth is. Then I convert that to a date time with the appropriate format, and I check if the year is less than 2006. So you'll remember from the last video, this will return a kind of list of true or false values. However, the format that this actually needs to return is the key being it is again going to be a dictionary where the key is the table name. So in this case, it's the header table because that's what we're working on. And the value is a list of index labels where this error has fired. So basically, list of index labels that have failed validation. So here we get all date of birth less than 2006. Then we get the index labels by using that true false list to get the list of index labels. And then finally, we call toList because for communicating between JavaScript and Python, we have to convert this to a list. So we'll talk more about writing your own errors and kind of implementing real things later, but that's how the error codes here work. And then we return these error validation codes. Then, yeah, once you've configured these, those get added to the config here, and you can see in the API without going into all the details of the code, there's two kind of external APIs here. So we have the run validation, where we'll pass a list of uploaded files and a list of error codes that we want. And you can again read this in your own time, but you can see here there's a line where we go on and call those functions on the uploaded files, and then we pass it back to JavaScript. And the other entry point that we have is right when we first load the tool, we need to get a list of all the errors that we can use. So this get error definitions list just returns a list of all the configured errors. And you can see here, all those functions returned the configured error together with a function that gives the error. So what I say here is get the error, don't get the function because we don't care about that, and then return a list of just the configured errors. And that's how this API works. So hopefully this is a okay introduction to the way that the code is laid out. I'll talk more about the testing side in a following video, but broadly speaking, the idea is I've written some tests to make sure this code does what I think it does, and those tests themselves are Python functions that run this code and check that if I pass certain values in, I get the values that I expect out. And for the validators, we'll also be over time writing tests to make sure that when you guys write the validators, they actually do what you expect. And this means that going forward, if we need to change something, the test will ensure that all the original behavior is still present and do that all automatically without a need for us to go back and manually check all the issues. I've also written in this integration section some integration tests that will check, for example, that all errors are unique. So there's no accidental error codes that are set the same for two different errors. And I'll be adding to these with other tests that I think are relevant for all the errors that we need to check for. So I'll leave this video here. In the next video, I'm going to talk about our sort of collaborative process and how you can actually put your code back on GitHub and add to this code base. And then in the last video, I'll run through some examples of errors, and we can talk about how you actually would go on to code a rule and submit that to GitHub.